I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that, securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we choose and believe.
Those who are most marginalized know the most about the truth, the good and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-Black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm Dean Detloff. I'm a PhD student at the Institute for Christian Studies in Toronto.
And I'm Matt Bernico. I teach media studies at Greenville University in Greenville, Illinois.
This week we are going to talk about the Socialist Party in a minute, but before we do, we have to confess that we've run completely out of creative juices, and we're both just totally spent, totally exhausted.
We're just really juiced over here.
Really, no juice left in the tank. I think it's because episode 100 is coming up, so I'm saving all the juice I've got till then.
Yeah, I've been teaching a really intense class over the last 2 weeks, so my juice has been going towards that, I guess, and I need to build up more. I feel like juice is bad, it's gross, right, in this kind of context? I need more podcast mana. I need to get more podcast mana before we can do episode 100. I think.
Yeah, that sounds right.
It is, yeah.
Pick up a few more globes, spend that in-game currency, get some more of that podcast mana.
That's right. Hey, do you know what always refills my my Christian leftist podcast mana fuel tanks?
Oh, I don't, but I'd love to know your secrets.
Yeah, my big secret here is I just read christianforums.com.
Yeah, I can see how that would regenerate everything in the tank. You might be surprised because I too like to read christianforums.com. I'll be curious to stumble across your avatar at some point.
Yeah. So I guess this is the bit we're doing now. We're going to talk about christianforums.com because we found it and it's so rad. And Dean and I have been on it maybe for a long time now, just reading the weird posts. But yep, that's right. It's a forum for Christians in 2019, the year of our Lord. And the forums range from everywhere to bad jokes. Clean jokes with no big swears in them, all the way out to Christian preppers, communities of Christians who are prepping for the end of the world. It's pretty wild, man. I don't know, but it does definitely make me feel better about my life, and I like that a lot.
Yeah, when Matt says that we've been looking at for a long time, it's 12:30 a.m. in Toronto right now, so that's the situation that we're in. Okay, let's dive in here. So where else would you start other than by descending down into the bunker in true Magnificast fashion to visit the Christian Preppers Forum? This is by far my favorite. My favorite for a couple of reasons. Let me read a quick statement of purpose on this forum. So they say, the purpose of the Christian Preppers Forum is to inform and encourage other believers to consider prepping. Prepping is the act of preparing for catastrophic events, natural disasters, and tribulations, biblical or non-biblical. Already very good. The hope is that in real life, Christian believers would then share their efforts and work towards building local communities of Christian preppers who will help each other and help the needy in the event that trouble comes. Here's what I love about this forum. First of all, it's bizarre. I love that. I love weird Christian subculture so much. But what I love the most about it is that there's actually a really, really charming motive underneath all this, that in the event of complete and total catastrophe, the Christians who are on Christian Preppers, you just got to find them. They'll help you out. This is what they're for.
Yeah, maybe on a regular prepper website, full of secular preppers.
A heathen prepping site.
That's right. That's exactly what I'm thinking about. you might find lots of conspiracy theories and pretty racist plots about people groups taking over the world or whatever. I don't know, that you might not find that too, but like that's just something you might find. It wouldn't be out of place, I think. On the Christian forums, Christian Pepper. Oh man, on the Christian forums,
Christian Peppers is pretty good.
Christian Peppers in my garden. Oh yeah, my Christian Pepper. That's my very religious grandpa.
That Christian Pep. It's really getting away from us tonight.
Could there be a subform that's just Christian Peepaws? Oh man. Well, okay, goddamn. Let me just start over from this whole situation here. Okay. So maybe on a secular prepper website, you might find like lots of conspiracy theories and how to build like a functioning toilet from stuff you find in the gas station or something. But on the christianforums.com, Christian Preppers subforum, you find really wonderful posts like this post from user Southern Scotty, who is a well-known member and has over 6,000 comments. Anyways, Southern Scotty posts, anyone else want to live in a cave?
I love it. It's so good.
It's so good and actually pretty wholesome. So Southern Scotty goes on to say, I've always wanted to live in a cave. We had one at our farm that was big and had a natural spring inside of it. I always dreamed of building a house in there and having a cascading waterfall in my living room. The temp would always be the same. The temp would always be the same, and you'd have clean water right there. I always thought it'd be awesome, so I looked out. Oh my gosh. I always thought it would be awesome, so I looked online at some of the amazing homes people have built in caves, and it's amazing. And then, the next commenter says, I've always wondered what it would be like. And then the third commenter says, nope, never want to live in a cave. That'd be really weird. So.
That would be really weird. Almost as weird as being on a Christian Preppers forum in the year 2018.
Yeah, it might be as weird as that. Yeah, could be. There's a lot of really weird things about this website. I'm not sanctioning sort of like anyone to maybe go and touch this ecosystem here. I think we do need to sort of preserve the wholesomeness of this for the most part. But just go take a look at christianforums.com and just kind of like you're going to the weird internet Christian zoo or something. It's a really weird situation.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. There's a lot of wild things about it. Like if you on the forums profile, you can identify where you live, you can identify your religious denomination, and you can also identify your marital status, including celibacy. Southern Scotty is celibate. It's really confusing to me because he's also Baptist, but I want to imagine that he's a Catholic priest, just like whittling away his hours, LARPing it as like a Baptist who wants to live in a cave.
Yeah, this user, celibate Baptist 47-year-old man with Tom Holland Spider-Man, and he's like trying to get people in this cave with him. So,
we don't know that Tom Holland isn't a Baptist.
We don't know that, and we also don't know if Tom Holland is or is not 47 and lives in Arkansas and is yearning to live in a cave. We just can't know.
We don't.
It's one of those things,
We never will. It's a secret that Tom will share at the appropriate time or will guard until he goes to his grave. That's up to Tom.
It's up to Tom. Don't pressure Tom. Stop tweeting at him about how he might be 47, please.
All right. Well, I mean, if anything, this very brief dive into Christian Preppers and ChristianForums.com should tell you that you ought to leave us a couple of iTunes reviews or something to give us some content to get us going. Because left to our own devices, we're obviously not capable. Speaking of, though, episode 100, like I said earlier, is coming up in just a few episodes, and we're going to try our hand at theology, but the Magnificast style. So if you're into that, send us some good theology questions that we can banter about for a little while. We'll bring our complete and total expertise, which amounts to literally actually zero.
Yeah, I mean, if you ever had like a question about theology and you definitely want some people who aren't experts to answer it, this is your time to ask it, I think. And you'll get our own sort of, skewed sort of like Family Guy kind of humor in it.
That twisted sense of humor, that offbeat, no FCC style humor.
That's right. We'll definitely have to probably bleep some of it out because it's just going to be full of cusses.
Yeah, HBO on Fox, that's us.
Cool. Hey, let's do some other stuff though. That's not this.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So in the very last episode we read some stuff from Jody Dean and kind of dug into the party structure to figure out what communist parties are supposed to do and why they might be important. We also tried to figure out maybe where Christians fit in with a party kind of situation and whether or not they could or they should or whatever. In this episode, we're going to take a look at an article that kind of explores that question more historically. So we read Dan McKanan's article, The Implicit Religion of Radicalism, Socialist Party Theology, 1900 to 1934. And we're going to just talk a little bit about what Dan McKanan saw within the Socialist Party of America and how Christians played a part in that particular leftist party.
Yeah, this is really exciting for me to talk through also because I'm teaching this in the class that I'm teaching on Saturday. So good chance to go over it a little bit and maybe give people a sneak peek of what's happening in that class. So what's great about this essay, I think, is that McKanan has this knack for summarizing a ton of historical data into digestible ideas or themes. And in this case, he identifies three. So he says that the theology that is part of the Socialist Party or that kind of emerges from it can be sort of understood as having these three essential recurring features. So we'll talk through each of them in a minute here, but just to get them all on the table up front. So he says it's defined first by an acknowledgement of social sin. So there's a social aspect, not just an individual aspect to sin. And then alongside that socialism is an integral part of the Christian message of salvation, which some of them sort of use the language of building the kingdom of God on earth by establishing a cooperative commonwealth. So it's this kind of Christian vision of socialism as the answer to that social sin. So that's the first theme. The second theme is that Jesus is a socialist. Not that he is compatible with socialism or that he would have hung out with socialists, but that he is one. So really strong claim. And then the third theme is kind of a weird one. It's this idea of universal religion, that socialism actually becomes a religion that supplants or transcends or supersedes Christianity. That's for sure the most complicated part, but we'll get into it here in a minute.
Yeah, each of these themes, I think, are things we've talked about on the show before, but this is kind of a way to historically situate them, at least in some way. So, okay, I guess we can start here. The article starts off kind of where Dan McKanan is framing what exactly his project is and why his project is, looking at the specific time period and the specific party. So Dan McKanan starts off saying this: "My own focus will be primarily on party activists who lacked a formal academic base and whose denominational ties were tenuous. A close look at the published theological reflections of these individuals reveals that they were thoroughgoing social gospelers, every bit as committed to a social interpretation of sin and salvation as the tradition's better remembered academic representatives. At the same time, Socialist Party activists typically place more emphasis on the themes of Jesus as a socialist and the emerging universal religion than did social gospelers whose primary professional loyalty was to the denomination or seminary." So, okay, just right from the bat, you can see exactly what Dan McKanan's going after. Dan McKanan is a very fun name to say. Just want to say that right now. I love saying it. Anyways, but you see what he's going after, right? He wants to look at these people who are part of the Socialist Party of America, who have this sort of social gospel understanding of religion, but they have a commitment that's even more than that they're actually socialists.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really neat about that is that he tries to distance them from the social gospel folks while at the same time saying they're part of that story. So he says they're thoroughgoing social gospelers, right, in the same way that other people like Rauschenbusch or Niebuhr or whoever would also be social gospelers. But they end up because they end up like actually aligning with an institutional moment on the ground through the Socialist Party, they don't get kind of remembered in the same way that some of these other social gospel folks do, who are, I guess, more naturally part of like the reproduction of the academy or the reproduction of professional theology. So this is like a bunch of emergent theologies on the ground that end up kind of being, I think that he's right to say that they get sort of misremembered or forgotten altogether in light of some of these other more like high-profile institutional social gospelers who don't like the institution of the Socialist Party, but do like the institution of their own kind of churches or the academic environment of churches.
Yeah, it's a cool take. I really appreciate someone going after the, maybe non-official theologies, or the theologies coming from people who don't, whose denominational ties are, quote, tenuous. I think those are the interesting ones that I think I'm more interested in at the moment anyways. So it's cool.
Yeah, and it's hard to do, right? Like you have to look a lot harder than like best-selling books and stuff like that. You have to sort of comb through newspapers or clippings or pamphlets or old books that people don't really remember today, but were influential 100 years ago or something.
Right, and luckily for Dan McKanan, the Socialist Party of America had its own Christian Socialist journal that like most of this is coming from. So that's where they're pulling a lot of the sourcing from. Yeah.
All right. So to kind of move through this, I mean, this is a historical article, so we'll be pulling out a few quotes, but just trying to riff off of them a bit. But here's another sort of interesting like setup thing that McKanan does. So he says, Christian and post-Christian social gospelers were an important constituency within the party from its beginnings, serving as organizers, educators, theorists, and candidates, and they were perhaps the dominant faction by the 1930s. For many of these radical religionists, the SPA was more than a political affiliation. It provided an institutional context for the work of theology that was as significant as congregations, seminaries, denominations, and ecumenical organizations. So it's really interesting because it's, again, stressing that sort of belief with an institution and being willing to throw yourself into it, which was a question we were trying to deal with last week, like where are Christians supposed to be in a party? And in this case, anyway, Christians are like right in the thick of it, even being what McKanan goes as far as to call a dominant faction by the 30s.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, this whole setup is basically just McKanan saying, like, surprise, they were Christians in the Socialist Party of America in the early 1900s. And, like, I mean, duh. Like, of course that's the case, but it's a pleasant surprise. And I think that to the extent the extent to which that like Christians were actually involved, like the number of them, it is actually a kind of a nice surprise. So
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so in more of this setup, McKanan says the Socialist Party of America that was founded in 1901 was by far the most electorally successful socialist movement in the U.S. history, which I was kind of surprised to know about too. That's like the party of Eugene Debs, that when he ran got 6% of the vote, which is the largest socialist vote in the United States. So that's something. So anyways, he goes on to say the party was so large because of the breadth of its constituency, drawing leaders from both the Social Labor Party and the People's Party. It sought to chart a middle path between the rigid Marxism of the former and the vague reformism of the latter. From the moment of its founding, the Socialist Party of America recognized that ministers could play a vital role in bridging the gap between immigrant workers and native-born Americans. And they did play that role like pretty thoroughly. So McKanan notes even in like a few lines down, at least a half dozen Protestant ministers were elected to public office on the Socialist Party ticket. Among them, Berkeley Mayor J. Stitt Wilson, Wisconsin Congressman Carl Thompson, and Massachusetts legislator Roland Sawyer. I don't know who any of those people are, but guess what? They were all pastors and they were socialists. Woo!
Stitt is a pretty good name.
Stitt is what is that even short for?
Pastor Stitt.
Pastor Stitley out there.
Yeah, it's good. Mayor of Berkeley, so I don't know. It must be a big deal.
Yeah, it must be.
Yeah, I think that's really good though, to emphasize that like not only was the Socialist Party really successful, and not only did Christians become an important part of it in the 30s or whatever, but they were there at the beginning in really big ways, right? They were often I mean, it's something we've talked about in the past, like when we talked about George Washington Woodbey and stuff. Like, pastors often performed a really intriguing role, I think, in the Socialist Party because they mediate all kinds of different communities and constituencies, partly premised on the idea that Christians shouldn't, like, be necessarily, like, fighting one another in their own faith, despite denominational differences or whatever. They kind of find some ways to converge within a socialist politics, and then they kind of communicate that back to communities that might otherwise not be friendly.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's like a cool way to set it up, and it gives us a context to start talking about these three themes. So we should talk through the first one a bit. It seems kind of obvious, I think. I mean, if you had to say, like, what's a Christian socialist, presumably you would say something like this, like it's a person who believes that there are structural or social sins, and that socialism is part of an essential Christian response to those social sins, right? So, like, I don't know. It might seem straightforward, but I think the real interesting thing here is you could say something like that without identifying yourself with a specific socialist party. In fact, you could say something like that and then go on to intentionally distance yourself, right? You could say, like, yeah, I'm a Christian socialist. I think socialism is how we should deal with these social sins, but I'm not like those, or I wouldn't join a party or something. But what's crazy about these folks is that that's exactly what they did, right? So we could talk about both sides of that equation. Maybe we should just talk about the first bit. So McKanan says, like all social gospelers, Socialist Party theologians insisted that theology was concerned not only with the relationship between God and the individual soul, but with society as a whole. Social solidarity was the great insight of the age, and classical notions of sin and salvation were to be applied to social structures as well as, or instead of, individuals. So kind of a maybe basic point, but I think a really important one to make.
Yeah, it is a basic point. I think it's like the point that underlies a lot of the stuff that we end up talking about in this podcast. But at the same time, it is like an important point because I don't feel like, I mean, if there is a resurgence of the left now or something, and that if there are Christians involved in it, like we seem to think that there are, we haven't figured this part out very well yet. Like, I mean, maybe we believe it or something, but we haven't ever, like, organized in any kind of coherent way to express this as actually being true.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. I mean, that's the real struggle on the Christian left today, in the U.S. and Canada at least. Like, there's no discernible mass movement of Christians that you could join that would give you any kind of sense that, like, you're a majority faction within a real socialist movement or something.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, the best you get is like, you know, you get in a Twitter bubble or like Reddit page or Facebook group or something, and that's like kind of as far as it goes.
Yeah, like even having Christians for Socialism or whatever here in Toronto is like a pretty small niche group of people.
Yeah.
Or like everything that's very cool about the Friendly Fire folks in Philadelphia, which is amazing, is like, you know, that's what's going on over there, which is amazing. There's other stuff going on in other places, but there's no kind of party structure or organizational hub that kind of unifies all those struggles.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to just like cast shade and say like look, we suck, but I think it's like the point is that like this is actually like a really important piece of it, that that Christianity has to be like understood as less individualistic and more social, and like we should probably figure that out. You know, yeah. Like I don't want to be like the Christian left sucks or whatever, or it's like completely a failure. I just don't think it's true. I just think it's just like a point we have to relearn.
Yeah, of course. But I think it's one of those things where you have to recognize the problem in its full force before you go on to kind of skip ahead to the solution. And I think a lot of Christian leftists are like rightly excited about the solution bit, but have a harder time like connecting the dots or something. I mean, myself included.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, McKanan goes on past that and kind of on the same point. He says, Socialist Party theologians nuance their understanding of social salvation by insisting that capitalism as a whole, and not only its abuses, was a form of social sin and thus incompatible with Christianity. Since God intended the good things of creation for those who labor with head or brain, declared the first local chapter of the Christian Socialist Fellowship, the brotherhood and comradeship of Jesus would be fully realized when the cooperative commonwealth of humanity is established in the world. Okay. There's a lot of nice stuff happening here, but I think still like the same point stands. It's just like, like understanding capitalism as a type of social sin just seems like it has to be more than like an understanding or a theological point, but it has to be more of like a matter of organization. So out of the Socialist Party of America came these like other sort of like smaller groups that were I don't know, they're not like maybe caucuses or other sort of like groups within the organization that were more geared towards Christians. So the one that came out of Eugene V. Debs' era, Socialist Party of America, was the Christian Socialist Fellowship, which is just a group of Christians who were also socialists that were in the party. So they were people that were figuring this question out of like, what does it mean to be a Christian, who was interested in understanding social sin and trying to figure out ways for reconciliation in like a sort of more party or institutional kind of format.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think it's cool to go out of their way to connect the problem of capitalism specifically with also the solution of that socialist vision or whatever. That these two things are necessarily connected. So it isn't just that like there are social sins or social dimensions to sin, which is the social gospel kind of hallmark or whatever.
Yeah.
But that, you know, you could name an entire economic system as being sinful, and like a specific one, right? And then you could turn around and also advocate for a program that would change that in its entirety, which would mark a certain kind of distance from some social gospel folks. Not all of them, obviously, but some of the big ones wouldn't go that far.
Yeah, I don't want to like skip ahead too far at this point, but like at the end of this article, Dan McKanan says he lays out some ways that these like themes are still around. And I think that this, like the social salvation and social sin kind of theme is definitely still around. I mean, it's something that I would definitely hear in my own church.
For sure.
But the thing I would not hear is that, like, yeah, so, like, joining the Socialist Party. That's not part of it. I wouldn't hear that part.
All right, so let's talk about that second theme. So the second one is that Jesus is a socialist.
I'm less thrilled about this one.
Yeah. No, we'll definitely dig into it. So it's not just that Jesus is like into socialism or would like socialists or whatever, but that he is one himself. So here's a quick quote. So McKanan writes, spurning the nuanced, multifaceted picture of Jesus favored by academic Bible scholars, they did not hesitate to declare flatly that the Bible is a socialistic book and that Jesus, the great proletarian, was a socialist. Jesus belongs to those who labor, declared Harvey D. Brown, while Eugene Debs himself insisted that Jesus was a carpenter's son who taught what socialism teaches. So that's like obviously an intervention in a rhetorical kind of game. This is something we talked a little bit about with Heath Carter a while back during the discussion we had with him about his book Union Made. But I think it's a really interesting intervention in that rhetorical game, right? Like they're trying to claim Jesus's legacy for themselves unapologetically. But Matt, I know you've got some beef with that move.
Yeah, I get it. I get it as like a rhetorical move, claiming Jesus as a socialist. I mean, but it's like what people always do with politics is like, well, Jesus was a Democrat or whatever. It just seems, it's just like, it's just as silly as saying that, I think. Not that, okay, I mean, I think that we can say a lot of like qualitative things about Jesus's politics. I think that's totally true. And I think that we can say that Jesus was like a worker, because that was probably true too. I mean, not probably, like definitely, huh? And he had a lot of things to say to workers. He had a lot of things to say about property and a lot of things to say about private property. And like, that is all totally true. But like, you can't say Jesus is a socialist because like capitalism didn't even exist yet or something. Like, you know, like it just seems like, or if Jesus is a socialist, it doesn't mean the same thing in that context as it does in this context. Like,
yeah.
The kind of time and place that Jesus is different, and like socialism as the Socialist Party of America does not exist as such. So like, is Jesus a proto-socialist, or is Jesus like a primitive communist? Like, yeah, like that's fine. I could get down with that. That's maybe a better description. But just saying that Jesus is a socialist is a rhetorical term that makes me just kind of roll my eyes, because I don't think it's like very good or like helpful even, because it's just one more way to demarcate like Jesus as belonging to this political party or whatever. And I don't know. It just does more harm than good, or it makes the conversation more complicated than it needs to be.
Yeah, no, I think there's something to that. And it's also, I think, important to ask why you would need Jesus to be a socialist.
Yeah.
Because, like, you don't. And if you feel that you do need Jesus to be a socialist to get Christians on your side, like, I think that there's a little more political education that you have to do with those Christians, probably. Because you shouldn't be a socialist because Jesus was one, honestly. I mean, it would be cool if he, like, came back or whatever and he was like, hey, you ought to be a socialist in this way or something like that. But you should be a socialist because of, like, that first point, the earlier point, I think, that you recognize that there's, like, a social sin going on if you're a Christian. And to remedy that, you need, like, an entire kind of remaking of the social terrain or whatever, rather than saying, well, Jesus would be a socialist or was a socialist, therefore I'm one. It's just kind of like an unthoughtful way of closing the gap. I think you're right about that.
Yeah. I don't know. If someone, like, if you got someone in the door of the party meeting, because, like you said, Jesus is a socialist, like, you'd have to have, like, a really long and, like, awkward conversation later when actually had to walk back most of your claims.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
It's like, oh, okay, cool, Jesus was socialist, that's great. Oh yeah, like, show me where he starts talking about industrialization and the proletariat and stuff. Where's that at? It's just like, oh, sorry, I meant these other things by it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it seems unhelpful. Like, just it's fine rhetoric, I guess, but just unhelpful.
Yeah. All right. Well, what do you think about this? Here's a little bit more rhetoric that we can talk about. So McKanan writes, sort of describing the uptake of Jesus in the party. Jesus' task was simply to restore the Mosaic Code. He did so as a class-conscious teacher, committed to the principle of from each according to his capacity to each according to his need. Like the anarchists, Jesus threw a bomb into the Roman conception of the state, though it was a bomb of love. A significant concession since the party was in the process of expelling IWW anarchists. Very important line. Yeah. But one of the theologians backpedaled by explaining that Jesus was too identified with the poor and lonely to be captivated by mendicant approaches to social reform. Instead, the socialists can well claim that were Jesus here today, he would be one of us. So, making a little bit more of that distance there, I think. But it's cool that McKanan, I think, also goes out of his way to show the complexity of the political situation as well, and how Jesus actually ends up weirdly wrapped up in some contemporary political problems like the IWW and SPA relationship.
Yeah, sure. Also, Jesus as class-conscious teacher. I can get down with that. That's okay.
Yeah, that sounds right.
It does sound right. He thought a lot about class. So there you go.
Jesus was a class-conscious teacher, though, is not the same thing you could print on a t-shirt as Jesus was a socialist.
Yeah. I mean, you could put it on a t-shirt, and I'd buy it. But I'm, like, also not very, fashionable, so.
Ben Wildflower could put it on a t-shirt. I could not.
Oh, dang, he could. And he'd make it look good.
That's true. All right, let's move to that third one, the last one.
This is the weirdest one, though.
It's really weird, and it is definitely, like, I don't know. It's one that is really hard to fully embrace, as though you have to. Obviously, you don't have to. But it's a hard one to, like, sympathize with, even. So the idea is that socialism would become a religious way of transcending Christianity into a true religion. So socialism is the true religion beyond Christianity. And I mean, there's some historical points that make a lot of sense of this. Like, this is something that's in the air around that time. You could, if you know much about, like, American transcendentalism or even just kind of American spirituality in general, like, there are all kinds of people trying to figure out, like, a more universal religion or universalizing form of religion. And in this case, it just happens to be socialism because that's the politics they're all working with. And I think that, like, the wild thing about it is that it ends up creating this really awkward situation where socialism becomes the universalizing mediator by which all important specificities actually get lost. Not only Christian specificities, but, like, all of them. And we've talked a little bit about that danger in this podcast before, but I think this is, like, a weird way in which the danger actually gets, the danger comes through the vehicle of Christianity in a really unsettling way.
Yeah, it's kind of like, well, okay. When you and I were starting to talk about this before we were recording, the phrase that we kind of came up with was social supersessionism, in the sense that like, Christianity will be emptied of its sort of like ethical and political meaning, that like understanding of social sin, and you'll do away with all of the other stuff that's like too weird for you to deal with as like a materialist or something, or like a just like sort of like rational person in the 1900s.
Right, and that's not just like supersessionism in the way of like just transcending Christianity or whatever, but in a way that like repeats the really, really bad supersessionism of Christianity itself or whatever. Where
Yeah,
you're like anti-Semitic.
Right, I think that's a good point, and I think I hate it. I think that's the worst idea. I mean, it's also this trope of like transcending Christianity, like, and getting rid of the weird stuff and just taking sort of like the social ethic is not like a new trope, I think. I mean, we can probably find all kinds of examples where people have like made like a rational Jesus that doesn't have, the miracles or whatever. But like what I hate so much about it is that like getting rid of the weird stuff in Christianity. And but when I say weird stuff, I mean like I guess all the supernatural stuff or all of like the, the real spiritual stuff or something. Like if you get rid of that, like a lot of the social ethics stuff doesn't really make sense, or it loses some of its like dynamism when you do that. Like if you wanted to just like supersede Christianity with like a socialist ethic that is informed by like Jesus the socialist, then like you get a really weird thing, because like you don't even get married. You can't even have the Magnificat if you like do that, right? Or you can't even have like bread and fishes if you do that. It's just like so much of who Jesus is as that class conscious teacher doesn't make sense unless you have like who Jesus actually is within the context of Christianity and the context of Judaism.
Yeah, and I think it also just becomes a weird form of like progress, like a weird narrative of progress that ends up eclipsing all the important things that people on the left should know about. I think like it isn't the case that okay, so here's where it repeats that really bad Christian anti-Semitism, because the way the narrative goes is like one time you had Judaism and then that got replaced by a better religion called Christianity, and then that is going to get replaced by an even better religion called socialism. And I mean, there are a lot of like really dangerous social problems with that. I mean, I don't know. It's like you don't want to end up creating a story where the world's getting better and better and better underneath the weight of like the brutalities of capitalism or whatever. But you also don't want to create a world where for the world to get better, you have to like do away with like the stupidity of like other religions, specifically like the Jewish religion in like the 1920s and 30s.
Yeah, exactly. That's particularly bad, huh? Yeah. So, okay, that thanks, I hate it, I think, past Christian socialists. There is a sense in which some of this is like, I guess I kind of can understand it, or I could kind of reason it out if we maybe take it in a little bit of a different direction. Like, if you think about it in different terms, though, like Jesus versus like Jesus the socialist kind of person, maybe in all of his Christian specificity, but versus like the idea of institutional religion, or the type of like shackles that institutional religion can like possibly put on like a real wild and radical Jesus, like that makes some sense instead, right? Like that's one way of thinking about it. Or a Christianity that is socialist, that is like moving against the idea of like congregation, or not congregations, but denominations. Like maybe that could make sense too, because that type of transformation, I think we can maybe even find today, even though it's not socialist. We could find that transformation of church being about denomination and theology and tradition, moving toward some different kind of direction where church means something different than that.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, and that's actually what Herbert McCabe talks about, that right in the Class Struggle in Christian Love, that if there's going to be another Reformation, it has to come along class lines, because the doctrinal differences aren't really important. They're not antagonisms in the way that the class antagonism is present. So sure, like there's definitely an element of that. And the sort of Jesus the socialist versus like all the hierarchies or denominations that try to tame Jesus or something. I think you're right to point that out.
Yeah. I wonder, this is like a question that I don't know how to answer, so it's probably dangerous for me to say it right now. but I wonder how like we might understand like the prevalence of like sort of non-denominational churches in light of that kind of framework, or like even not even non-denominational churches, but like post-denominational churches where it's like, listen, our church, it's so cool, you're gonna love it. It doesn't have a coffee shop in it. It's not a mega church. It meets like in a movie theater and like or whatever. You know, it's like not even a church. It's like post church Christianity or something, where that might be like a type of counter-revolutionary reformation along class lines, where it's like very bourgeoisie.
Yeah, that's true. It's also weird. Yeah, it's crazy to think of like non-denominational churches as places where you go to transcend all the meaningless differences of Christianity and like unite around your common liberalism or something.
Or like your common, like, not even liberalism, but common like just like centrism and and like desire for like a meaningless spirituality.
Yeah, your common consumerism, I guess.
Yeah, I think that might be, there's a Baudrillardian thing going on here, I'm positive of.
Yeah, no, I think you're right about that. It's too bad that Baudrillard went to California and didn't just go to megachurches.
Dang, if Baudrillard went to the Midwest rather than California, it'd have been, Baudrillard would have gotten depressed way quicker.
Yeah, but he would have gotten a lot of better writing done.
That might be true.
All right.
If I could have taken Baudrillard down to some, okay, I don't know if you've ever been to like Arkansas. Arkansas is not a bad place inherently, I don't think, but I've been to Little Rock, Arkansas, and like I think most of the things I saw were these churches in like old used car dealerships. They used to be car dealerships, but now they're like non-denominational churches. And I wish I could just resurrect Baudrillard and bring him there and just be like, look. This is what. Look at this.
That is such an amazing like commingling of symbols.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot to unpack, and it was a few years ago that I saw that, and I'm still thinking about it. So
it just makes me think of Danny DeVito and Matilda as a evangelical megachurch pastor.
Yeah,
it works.
And then when you sin, they make you eat a big chocolate cake,
and they put you in the chokey.
Oh boy, I haven't seen that movie in a while.
Yeah, me neither. All right, so we're losing the plot here. Let's round this around. Round it around. It's past 1 a.m. already. All right, so here's something that's really neat about this article. It does a lot of historical stuff. It brings out some weird stuff. But what's cool, and also I think really problematic at the same time, is that McKanan tries to illuminate like some contemporary trends really, really briefly, probably all too briefly, by thinking through the legacy of Socialist Party theology. And what I think is actually cool as an approach is to say, all right, the Socialist Party isn't around anymore to the same degree or in the same way that it once was, and all the Christians who were there seem to have, not stayed on with the same force that we might have hoped. But nevertheless, their legacy kind of lives on in other ways, and they've transformed our society in ways that we're still unable to shake. I think that's actually a cool impulse, to say that this isn't something that's like completely lost to history or whatever, but it takes a little bit of work to maybe find out where the threads, where they lead, and also maybe where they end in certain points in history.
Yeah, I think so too. It is a cool thing. Yeah, it's a cool article because I mean it's like it's just part of the history of the social gospel that we don't know about. But yeah, in the conclusion, he does definitely try to bridge, or he tries to make some connections I think are not the best, or maybe he just like mislocates them. Like he's trying to find the places that those like major themes of the Socialist Party, of like the Socialist Party theology, like where they are today. And like how around they are, and he locates them in some pretty bizarre places, in my honest opinion.
Yeah, I agree. Well, let me read just like the sort of concluding paragraph here, because he brings some of them out, and then we'll talk about it. So just a minute, because it's kind of it's a few lines. So he says, the major themes of Socialist Party theology remain prominent in certain circles. evangelical activists affiliated with Sojourners magazine and the new monastic movement echo the Jesus the Socialist tradition by treating radical activism as a form of imitatio Christi. While the desire for a universal religion is evident in the spiritual but not religious activists attracted to the network of spiritual progressives, as well as much of the women's spirituality movement. Many Catholic worker communities and communities that identify as in the tradition of the Catholic worker include a bunch of people he goes on to talk about. Yet the particular theologies implicit in these identities have not received as much academic attention as the liberation theologies that emerged when Reinhold Niebuhr's academic and denominational admirers verged back to the left. The imbalance is understandable. Academic historians of theology naturally begin with the history of academic theology, but will not fully understand the diverse logics of religious reasoning until we have plumbed the depths of Socialist Party theology and its many analogues. So let's start from the bottom and work up, because I think the bottom is actually a very good point.
Yeah, it's weird how like I think everything he's saying is right except like the few examples he pulls out.
Yeah, exactly. That is what's so strange about this article. Like, what he's advising is extremely good advice. Like, don't just start with the academic canon of social gospel Christians or progressive Christians. You've got to look a little harder, and maybe you have to look at like socialist institutions and then find out where the Christians are rather than the other way around. Like, find out where the Christians are and then see what social institutions they get involved in. Yeah. I think that's like extremely good and the right approach.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, 100%. Okay. But the weird part, okay, I want to be charitable here too, because I don't think it's like 100% wrong. Like I kind of see where he's coming from, but also it just feels weird to me. Okay.
Yeah.
So back that was the bottom part that I think is good. Let's talk about the beginning that I think is a little bit whack. Mm-hmm. The major themes of Socialist Party theology remain prominent in certain circles. Evangelical activists affiliated with Sojourners magazine and the quote new monastic movement echo the Jesus the Socialist tradition by treating radical activism as a form of imitatio Christi. Okay, hang on. So, like, this makes sense to me because both Sojourners and New Monasticism did kind of treat the ethics of Jesus as, like, a call to activism. I think that's true. Mm-hmm. Sojourners definitely did that. New Monasticism, I think you could say, is about that in some ways. I mean, Shane Claiborne, I'm sure, has shown up to a few protests in his day. That wouldn't surprise me at all. So I believe...
Yeah, he goes to lots of them. He's into it.
He's into it. It's great. Sorry. Okay. Anyways, the part that seems like weird to me, though, is that the Sojourners magazine or New Monasticism echo the Jesus is the Socialist part of the tradition. So, right. Like, I believe that they are interested in activism, but I don't believe that they're interested in socialism in a really robust way. Like, I don't know. I'm not an avid reader of Sojourners, but I do kind of like get the feeling I know what they're about just by kind of reading the amount I have read. And it seems like, Sojourners is maybe more of like that good sort of like crunchy left liberalism of like the best types of churches or something, that are interested in activism. I mean, I also want to give the provision, too, that I think since Daniel Camacho is now in charge of the Sojourners Online magazine and John Thornton
he's one
writing,
editor, but...
Right, and John Thornton's out there writing all those Enneagram articles, like, maybe it's different now. But, like, I don't think it's super true.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's right. And it's also, it is the Jesus the Socialist thing is what makes all the difference, right? Because he says, totally. Like, that's what characterizes Socialist Party theology. But I would guess, like, I mean, I could be wrong, but presumably if you asked, like, the Shane Claiborne who wrote the book Jesus for President, was Jesus a socialist in the way that Eugene Debs is a socialist? He probably would have said no, is my assumption. Yeah. And he, like, wouldn't be wrong to say it. It's just that, like, it's a completely different vision of the politics of Jesus. Like, people in the Socialist Party were not reading, thinking, what's his name? The pacifist guy. Howard Yoder. John Howard Yoder is, Howard Yoder. Good old Howie Yoder. They weren't reading, like, his Politics of Jesus book and then kind of extrapolating a politics out of it. They were, like, participating in socialist politics and then thinking about Jesus in light of it, which strikes me as kind of the complete reverse.
Yeah, it's different because, like, Shane Claiborne's, like, the point is that, like, people who are engaged in, quote, politics of this world, wouldn't ever want Jesus as president or something like that, right?
Right.
Whereas the Socialist Party, they have a sort of theological approach and kind of a Christology that's like, yes, we do.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
and
Jesus
he looks like Eugene
is
Debs.
one of us. Yeah, exactly. He looks like Eugene V. Debs. So I don't know. It seems like, on the one hand, I understand what Dan McKanan's after at this point, but I think that it's just like a weird connection that doesn't actually quite connect.
Yeah, it's a really weird thing because it undermines something that he says earlier in his article, which is basically like a lot of academic people look at the social gospel and they think of all these people who are tied to like these institutions, whatever, and they have maybe a more like a softer version of a radical Jesus, whereas we should be looking at the Socialist Party. And it's like, well, I totally think that he would be right to note that the social gospel lives on in Sojourners and the New Monastic Movement. Like that, like no arguments there.
Yeah, but like the official social gospel story, not the one he lays out here.
Exactly. So I don't know. It's a weird inversion.
Okay, but wait, let's add this in really quick though too.
Yeah.
Dan McKanan does say that the Catholic Worker also, echoes that Jesus is socialist, and that's probably true.
Yeah.
I mean, it's actually very true. I don't know. We've talked to Joe Cruz before. We know he's like, and yes, that's true. There.
Yeah, it's good. I think though he also has a weird thing when he tries to connect the like universal religion trope, because he says that categorizes the network of spiritual progressives and much of the women's spirituality movement. That's a very nebulous thing to say. But I think what's weird about that is even in those cases, like if you're spiritual but not religious as an activist, that's not the same thing as saying socialism is the religion, the true universal religion that will eclipse all other sort of faith traditions.
Yeah, I think so. That's pretty different, actually.
Yeah, like, sure, like they inherit a certain kind of like American spirituality maybe, or I don't know, like they have some kind of tie to like this transcendental like new thought or theosophy that also feeds into the Socialist Party, but it isn't the case that the Socialist Party lives on in those movements, because like as far as I know, they don't really have anything to do explicitly with wanting a Socialist Party institution. There are socialists in them or whatever, but I'd be pretty surprised if they described socialism as like their own true religion or whatever, as on the whole or something.
And it would be so wild if that, if that is the case and we're wrong on this, like that is, I would love to know more about it, because like it'd be the funniest and weirdest thing to people who are like interested in like new thought or theosophy, and they're like, but also materialism.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And also, like, if we're wrong about it, please tell us, because that would be great.
Well, okay, I'm open to knowing. I'd be if there's some kind of like weird 1900s theosophy socialism mashup, I would love to know about it. It would be very fun.
Yeah. There is some of that, actually.
Yeah,
I'm reading a really good book right now as background for the class that I'm teaching with this article in it, called History of Marxism in the United States. And he makes this really awesome argument that what catalyzes socialism in the U.S. isn't like the discovery of Marxist science or Marxism and Engelsism, but rather it emerges out of an American spiritualist tradition, and then the Marx stuff kind of comes on later as like a helpful device to sort out a bunch of the weird utopian stuff that's going on in like the 1800s, 1900s.
Yeah, and actually now that you say that too, Elizabeth Cady Stanton was like she was like a Democratic socialist, if you know who she is. She was like a really popular sort of suffragist person, and also a person who was really interested in like that early like women's, like Christian women's movement. But she ended up being a socialist, and also has like some weird other like stuff going on in her life too. So I guess it's like it's out there, I suppose. Listen, we just said if it's out there and we don't know about it, tell us. But look, I think we know about it, I guess.
All right. Well, I think this is probably a good time for us to wrap it up. It's so late that we don't even need transition music to get over to the outro. That's how I feel about it right now.
Yeah. We don't need any at all.
All right, thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/themagnificast. You should also send us some hot theology questions ask us completely unqualified to talk to you about what's going on with the Trinity. How are there three people and one person and three people? We'll come up with an answer on the spot. Also, so I guess, I don't know, email those to us at themagnificast@gmail.com.
And listen, if you don't, we're going to just read more Christian preppers. Like, that's what's going to happen.
Is that what you want? You want to be in the bunker?
Whoa, hey, wait a minute. Okay, hang on. Is Rod Dreher's Benedict option about Christian preppers?
In a way, yes. He's prepping for the decline of Western civilization, I guess.
Yeah,
foolishly. But
if you think about it, though, all Christianity is kind of like prepping, you know, because like Jesus is the one true preparation you need.
Yeah, if you think about it, that's true. That's exactly why I don't. I choose not to.
Yeah, that's the part though that you weren't doing, is thinking about
it. that was it. So if you start thinking about it and you have some good Christian prepping tips, you can tweet them at us at the Magnificast. You can talk to us about it in the Magnificast basement, which is our Facebook group. Probably the most appropriate place for Christian prepper tips. Yeah, shoot us an email. All right, as always, our music is by Amory Armstrong, who has a great album out, by the way, on Bandcamp. Check that out. It's in our episode description from last week. And our outro is by The Illogical Spoon. All right, see you next week.
I don't want to get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord.